Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar with Margot Note. My name is Bradley, and I will be your moderator for this episode titled Archival Relationship-Building. Before we start, I would like to provide some information about our company and introduce today's presenter. Lucidea is a software developing company specialized in museum and archival collections management solutions, as well as knowledge management and library automation systems. Our brands include Sydney, Presto, Argus, Archivera, Eloquent, and Quadrastar. Now, I would like to introduce today's presenter, Margot Note. Margot Note is an author, archivist, and records manager, helping individuals and organizations harness their history. As the principal of Margot Note Consulting LLC, she facilitates the understanding of the importance of unique collections, suggesting ways to manage them and use them to tell stories to connect with people. She's also a popular guest author for Lucidea's Think Clearly blog and has provided us with many great webinars that are listed on our website. So please feel free to check those out after today's session. Take it away, Margot.
Thank you so much. So I'm excited today to talk about people and archives. So, and I've said this to my clients before, it's like the archival workflows, the technology, the software, that type of stuff is like easy to understand. It's always the people that are kind of the mystery and that kind of and the magic that comes out of doing archives. And it's a lot of psychology that I think is involved as well. So when we're talking about archives and advocating for archives, it's really important to have those relationships that we build internally with our colleagues, with our peers, with our decision makers within the organization. And so relational development is really talking about, promoting advocacy, secures the rightful place in the organization. So not the archivist that's down the hall or in like the dusty, back room somewhere. It's someone that's part of the organization, that's front facing. And it really is essential for visibility because archives are in many ways kind of a black box and people don't really understand what we're doing and why we do the things that we do because there's a lot of reasons why. And I think it's really important for us to really advocate for ourselves. And that's the whole reason that I've done these blog posts, this webinar series, and a book about archival advocacy internally. So unlocking a recognition. So you need the relationships for the recognition. I have found out kind of the hard way that you can be an excellent archivist. You can have, at one point, at one position I had zero backlog. Like I had 3 years of backlog. I did it in a couple months. Like especially in this one organization, I really felt really proud about the work that I did. But because I spent the time on the work and not necessarily building those relationships, people just didn't really understand. And because I was never a problem, like if you're a good employee and you're not a problem, you're kind of invisible. And certainly that was kind of the culture that was part of that organization. But connections are really crucial for support. And so I'm going to be talking in this webinar series about internal relationships, but I also want you to kind of keep in the back of your mind thinking about kind of relationships within the field as well, because those are just, I think, just as equally good for kind of your career. But if we're talking right now about advocacy for your specific position, we want to focus on internal advocacy and relationship building. So bridging roles, networks connect to organizations, collaborations showcase support, and they also highlight the archivist's relevance. So I think, and we'll talk kind of the different stages of these types of networks, but it's really thinking about kind of your rightful place within the organization and what you can do to build those relationships. And I should say too, I have no data to support this, but I imagine that most people that are drawn to archival work tend to be maybe more introverted, more thoughtful, maybe perhaps more quiet. They're not kind of the loud personalities that would be like that a salesperson would have, for example. So I think I do want to be mindful that because I'm such an introvert, that kind of building these networks, I want I want you to think about when you're thinking about relationship building is that you're making these connections in a way that feels good to you, that feels authentic to you. I've read so many books about networking that have really focused on kind of the more extroverted person, and that just for me that's just not going to work. So I really want to be mindful that kind of relationship building is really kind of is something that you can do, and it could be tied to who you are personality wise and fundamentally. We don't, and it's authentic too. It's not like putting on an act. It's really kind of showcasing your value and your efforts. So there's three kind of networks: operational, personal, and purposeful. And everyone has them. And so we're going to go through kind of what do I mean when I mention these networks. One is operational, so that's purely well, it can be internal and external contacts. It's the emphasis on purpose and actions and future focused. So really thinking about the work that you're doing now, the network that you have both internally within your organization with some external people, and really focused on kind of purpose and action that you're working with. There's also personal networks, so that's coming from kind of your past, your present hobbies and associations that you're part of. It really drives personal and professional growth. It is really interesting. The external contacts prioritize a lot of the interests. So maybe some people in the same field, maybe people that are maybe in a field that you're interested in pursuing. And the emphasis on the breadth with a diverse range of referrals. So I've always found like LinkedIn as kind of mind-numbing as LinkedIn can be, or like as corporate speak as it can sometimes be with some posts that people have. LinkedIn, I think, is a perfect place to like I post on it to talk about, my work or talk about archives and records management, not necessarily for clients that I'm going to get, but to use a simple way to touch into some personal networks that I have, that people that could be a referral to my business are reminded of me, like in these. So it's a way to kind of freshen up. And you can use that with any type of social media. I just personally think LinkedIn is probably I feel like they're mining less of your information from there, but who knows? Um, but it's a nice way to figure out a way to touch base with people in your personal network. And then there's also purposeful networks. So uh, thinking about who you're reaching out to, and making some good connections in the future. So really thinking about who can you maybe cold contact or network with that might ultimately have you meet someone else. So it's a different way to think about how to reach out to people. You definitely have to have political astuteness. So thinking about identifying the critical stakeholders and nurturing relationships with power centers within your organization. So really knowing who in your organization holds power, and that could be people on your board, on committees, maybe some external people. And it's essential for advocacy. So really thinking about who might be able to help you. And again, archivists aren't necessarily drawn to this profession to be kind of political animals, but it is important, especially for a field in which people don't really understand the work that we do. And one way to do that is utilizing boards. And so this can be slightly tricky because if you're in, and it could be committees as well, depending on what organization you're part of, but they really influence decision makers. They can offer cost-effective initiatives. There could be ways of revenue generation, like especially with donations, and you can leverage boards for resources. So I found that if you, let's say, have board members or people that are really powerful within your organization that care about history, that care about archives, they're a really great person to reach out to, and introduce yourself and kind of get to know what they're interested in. And I found that's kind of helpful. Like in past work that I've done, um, it was funny. It was only until some of the archival work were reaching out and people and organizations like Google were interested in the work that I was doing that we got people like to understand, like, oh, okay, if this big corporation cares about our stuff, then it must hold value, and sometimes that's it, you're really thinking about kind of big headlines for people that are on boards, like they're not really get into the granularity of the archives, but they will get kind of the big pieces and those big kind of splashy headlines that you can let them know about. So you also want to think about your powerful allies within your organization, which is leadership, bosses, and internal customers. So people that use the archives that you can help. And so we'll talk a little bit about how to work with these types of people. And there's also budding allies, so your peers and colleagues, your direct reports, and other employees within your organization that you might have some relationship with, or maybe not much of a relationship at all, and you can help build that relationship. And then leadership. Leadership is really important for, they get things done. Like I was thinking about a client I had, the top person was really adamant about doing this specific work in the archives, and having her buy-in, and she was extremely powerful, as you can imagine, within the organization. Having her be the front runner and have so much buy-in and really having this be her pet project, that moved things along so much quicker. Like people were willing to help the archives, were willing to help us so much easier because they knew that the head person was 100% behind this project. It was a pet project of hers. They can obviously give financial approval and access to resources. And I think the thing that they can do that costs 0 cents is to really help with obstacles, to say that so-and-so is for this, or have them make a phone call, or have them have a meeting, and you can help get things done. So really think about the leadership within your organization that might be able to help you with that. There's also bosses and different types of bosses. And depending on your position with the organization, you might report to one person, or you have that person report to someone else that reports to someone else. And so they're important for kind of understanding the expectations, assisting in achieving wins, assessing alignments, and discovering conflicts of interest. So it was funny. I used to have this boss, and she would get sometimes a little paranoid about things, or she somehow thought I was conniving against her. I'm not really even sure, but I remember having to tell her in a meeting that we were, as one-on-one meeting, and I said, her name, and I told her, it's in my best interest to make you happy, to make you, if you look good, I look good. I'm not, sometimes you really have to have those kind of come to Jesus talks with your boss, and hopefully you can have a relationship where you can be really honest. But I think that's part of relationship building too, is knowing kind of what you can say in a way that could be listened to and not be used against you. And that is sometimes a really hard line to figure out. And internal customers. So thinking about who within your organization do you help with the archives? So you want to understand their priorities, find ways to help, and then also address the challenges that they have. I think that's a perfect way to do your own kind of subtle marketing program, is if you can help a problem of an internal person within your organization that's struggling with something, or needs a problem solved, or needs information regarding the history of the organization, or whatever they need, and you can help resolve that problem or that challenge and make their life that much easier, you're going to have an ally for life, and they're going to be hopefully talking about it to other people, and the kind of word gets out. I've definitely seen that in my own experience and in the experience of my clients as well. You have peers, so people that are within your team or maybe similar positions with you within the organization. So you want to identify those who need help the most. Think about those who have the greatest impact, and then invest your political capital in those people. So really seeing who can help you. And it's, you're doing all this ethically and not being kind of Machiavelli about it, but really making sure that you're um, helping people that can help you. Yes, I guess I'd put it that way. So for direct reports, you're identifying influential team members. You want to predict their perceptions and analyze the existing alliances within your team. So these are things, it's not necessarily something that you're kind of thinking about all the time, but it is helpful to maybe take a little bit of time, have a little bit of a step back and really think about the relationships within your organization and seeing, who you can influence, who you can better build a relationship with. And who can you kind of help with the archives? For other employees, you're identifying kind of informal influencers, and they can be people within the organization. Let's say someone that's been there for a very long time, like the first hire, the second hire. And they could maybe not have that much power with the organization, but they could have a lot of influence. People that have potential support and also prospective opposition. I'm reminded of a client that I had that we were doing something that was a little bit different for them related to records management. And it was really important to get this, two colleagues, you needed to get these two colleagues that did not have positions of power, because they had some influence, but people looked to them as kind of the internal historians of the organization. So it was really important to get their buy-in and get their understanding of the project. And at first they were a little hesitant about certain things related to records management, but it was really important for us to have that conversation and to feel like they were listened to get their buy-in, to take that time to explain it to them, because the other employees knew if these people weren't on board, no one was going to be on board. So it really was, and that certainly wasn't necessarily my suggestion to do this, but the person that I was talking to, the president, knew that this was really important. So that was really valuable time that we spent kind of talking about records management and what we wanted to do. And ultimately we got people on board that might have not understood or been with no buy-in. I don't think they would have been opposed to what we were doing, but we certainly needed their support. It made things a lot easier. So there's a ways to map stakeholders. So we want to prioritize relationships with decision makers, map the interest and influence of people, and then reinforce the favorable treatment that we get from these stakeholders. And I will go through what these stakeholders would look like. So if you think about kind of certainly you see this in like influence and interest matrix, where there's kind of 4 boxes and 4 quadrants. You have people that have high influence and low interest in the archives, high influence, high interest in the archives, low influence, low interest in the archives, and low influence and high interest in the archives. And I will go through each one of those because that's really quite a mouthful. So people that have high influence or low interest for the archives, they obviously have a lot of power within the organization. They may not be interested with things that are going on in the archives. They're not really, they in their minds, they have kind of bigger things to think about. So we want to make sure that we keep them informed and think about how the work that you're doing can benefit from their influence and how we can create and foster their buy-in. So we're kind of wooing them a little bit, and seeing if we can get more interest in the archives, but we're kind of assessing where they are right now and knowing that they could be a powerful ally if the circumstances are right. We also have high influence, high interest. So these are people, I think, that are really powerful to the work that we're doing. They have significant impact within the organization. they're highly interested in the archive. So these are people that come from, let's say, a history background. Maybe they're more detail-oriented or data-oriented for whatever reason. They maybe are longer-term employees of the organization. They think about the past. They are interested in the archives. So we want to collaborate them to address their needs and think about how they are already influencing the work that we're doing. And then how can we influence them even more to use their influence? So these are really, really powerful allies that we want to keep them informed, and we want to leverage their power and our interest. There's people that are low influence, low interest, that they don't really care about archives. They don't have a lot of power within the organization. So neither high level influence or strong interest, may not require attention. We're just kind of monitoring them, just seeing if anything changes. Could there be a way that we could get them more highly interested? Perhaps there's a way to do that. Could we impact them? How can we promote the benefits of archives to them? Again, these are people that we might turn into allies, but I think we'd focus more on the people that have higher influence. I think that would have more of an impact. And then there's people that have low influence and high interest. So they're strongly interested, they might have limited influence. We want to keep them informed and engaged. And these are kind of the quiet cheerleaders within the organization. Sometimes when they are closely aligned to people that have more power, sometimes we can help wrangle those more highly influential people. So think about what are their perspectives and how might the archivist grow their influence, and really, really kind of try to take advantage of that. So we want to transform attitudes. So we want to court colleagues that have power and influence. We want an open dialogue, again, going back to my conversation about having people within the organization in that specific project I was working with that were kind of opposed to, or seemed at least initially opposed to what we were doing with records management. Having an open dialogue, having a meeting, just a conversation. There was no agenda, really, written agenda. I mean, I certainly had an agenda in my mind, but really kind of hearing what they had to say and having them listen to what I had to say, I think made such a big impact. And it really does transform attitudes. And then we want to dispel preconceived notions. So I think I would argue that archivists are like the least underappreciated people, one of the most underappreciated fields. I mean, obviously, I'm completely biased here, but I mean, people do not understand the value of the work that we're doing. That's just simply a fact. We're not always the best at advocating for ourselves or really talking about the work that we do. So we want to make sure that kind of being focused forward, where you can dispel preconceived notions that people might have about the work that we do, and really, inform them. And I find that once people kind of understand what you're doing, or you can kind of feed them little snippets of the work that you're doing, they actually find a lot of interest in it. Like, I think but they have to come to it. You can't just say, I'm doing something that's very valuable. You really have to show, not tell, in that situation. And finding opportunities to do that is really important. Engaging departments. So I was talking kind of about more on the employee level, like the one-on-one level, but then we're also thinking about departments. So thinking about, are there tailored presentations that you can do? Can you do updates to departmental directors and piquing interest with personalized insights? So there are some departments within an organization that are kind of more naturally aligned to archives. I would say, well, the legal department is more naturally aligned, let's say, with the records management pieces of doing archival work. Marketing is a lot of times aligned with the archives because there's a lot of content creation. Those are the ones, and sometimes kind of the admin, kind of the general admin. What I found too, and programs too, depending on the organization, sometimes the program departments can be interested. But it really depends on the organization that you have. I found that sometimes there could be, and I'm sure I've said this in previous webinars, that you could be surprised by who would be kind of a natural engaging department that you wouldn't really think about. So one client comes to mind. It was a university, and I certainly thought the humanities would be involved in the archives, and for whatever reason, they really weren't. It was more the people in STEM that wanted to have archives visits, wanted to look at those materials. I think to add kind of more nuance to the work that they were doing. So those departments were like highly interested in the archives. The fundraising department was odd because it was more of a, there should have been more, I think, of a way to align, but there's kind of difficult personalities. Marketing was definitely aligned. And they found with this university, especially, it's one of their biggest allies and their best allies was kind of the maintenance team. So our like facilities, anyone involved in facilities, because if facilities was cleaning out someone's office, they'd be like, okay, we've got to call the archives because there's boxes here, or there's some artifact that's like this old artifact, or they were the ones that were really talking about and the most interested and the eyes and ears on campus for the archives. And that was really mind-blowing to me to think about that, because I mean, and that makes complete sense. I just wouldn't have thought about that. And this situation, for whatever reason, the facilities was just really aligned and on board with archives and really helped talk about archives, especially if people or departments or programs didn't really know about the archives or the library. I thought that was really interesting, and it worked really well. That facilities was able to see and be the eyes and ears and advocate for the archives too. It was really cool to see. So increasing the visibility. So relationship building obviously raises the profile of archives and the work that we do. It creates opportunities to educate, to talk about what we're doing in a way that's not maybe a formal webinar or a presentation, but kind of have kind of Slack conversations, or over coffee or something like that. And then it helps shift the perception from archives from operational to essential, or I'd say nice to have to essential to an organization. I think a lot of times archives are kind of seen as like nice to have, or like a luxury in some places, where we really want to change that perception that we are influential in all departments. We help the organization in so many ways that we really are essential. And we were able to see the history of an organization, past, present, and future, with a much wider lens than everyone else does. Fostering partnerships, collaborations drive innovation, historical insights. There's historical insights for new perspectives and enriches organizational capabilities. So I think partnerships is a really important part of relationship building, is thinking about how can we work together, kind of in a more formal way than just maybe helping on a one-on-one thing, but maybe thinking about projects that you can work with people within your organization. Operational is always great. I mean, it's always good to get your operational down, but I'm such an advocate of project management. Some of you may or may not know, but I love project management, and projects, I think, with partnerships are a way to raise the profile of archives, that there's something that's new and different that's being done, and that can help build that partnership over time. And I think that's a perfect opportunity to do that. And we need relationships for recognition. So it's really hard, and I'm speaking from experience, it's really hard not to be in the work. I know I always hit in the stacks. My natural inclination is to hide in the stacks and do the work. That's what comes naturally to me. That's what I love to do. But I think over time, and what I've learned in some hard ways, is that that's not enough. And it's really thinking about talking about the work that you do, talking to people about how you can help them, and getting into the details. It just kind of can be mesmerizing to people. You might not even realize it. So relationships are really good for visibility, for acknowledgement, and also for long-term planning. So you're thinking about, how can I advocate for my position right now? But in the future, what will this department, what will the archives look like 3 years from now, 5 years from now? What will my career look like as I build these relationships? So that's, I think, very, very important to think about as well when you're advocating for archives.
Thank you, Margot, for the wonderful presentation. And if you'd like to learn more about our archival collections management system called Archivera, please feel free to visit our website or reach out to us at sales@lucidea.com, and we'd be happy to have a chat with you. If you have any more questions on any of our software or our company, our contact details are listed on the screen. Please stay tuned for more webinars and content related to this series. And on behalf of the Lucidea team, I thank you all for attending today. And until next time, thank you.